Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 85 with Dave and Mark. We have an awesome guest for you. We got Martin Kidd from Victory Amps. Martin, how are you?
Very well. Thank you very much. Very
Dave,
nice
what's going on with you?
Same as usual.
Yeah.
Same as usual.
Busy, not much, working at home, working at shop, working both places,
And Martin, are you guys locking down again? I heard.
Yes, as of Thursday. I'm not sure at the moment the restrictions are the same as they were earlier this year. So I think we might be allowed to go to work. But quite honestly, I don't know, because I work from home most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't really affect me a great deal.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was. I didn't have to go up to the factory as much, but that was really it. So we will see, and hope it does the job this time. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. And yeah, hopefully. Well, I think we've got a big day coming up next Tuesday, but we won't talk about that.
Oh yeah. Civil unrest, probably.
Oh yeah. It's
most likely, depending on the outcome, civil unrest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. I am anxious about it, I will say, but in any case, we've got a lot of people watching, close to 100 right now, and so Martin, I've wanted to try out your amps for a while. I have not had the opportunity, but I have heard so many great things about you, about Victory amps, even beforehand when you were in you worked on Cornford amps, I believe. Yeah. So what exactly is your role with Victory amps?
I design them, so I come up with the circuits, and that's it in a nutshell. I'll be given sometimes a design brief. We need to make an amp that's good for clean, sounds, pedal platform type amp perhaps, or one that does metal, and that will be my design brief, and then I'll go from there. And it may be that I'm told, let's do a lunchbox version of that, so I know how much space I've got to play with. And the lunchbox format has been quite successful for us, and that was given to us by Guthrie Govan. That was that's how it all started, with that size amplifier. And so that's really my role. So circuit board, the circuit board design, transformer design, chassis design. I don't do the artwork, and I don't do the metalwork. Well, I do the metalwork drawing, and then I give it to someone else who makes a better job of it. And I don't do the woodwork drawings. So yeah, most of the design process, and then I'll tweak it once we've got a working prototype. They normally work, as you'll appreciate, but they don't necessarily, they're not exactly how you want them. But I'm sure that's the case for everyone, or everyone that does what we do.
Oh yes, that's pretty normal. Normally you have to make the prototype, then listen to it and go, God, that's not right. Okay, hang on, and tweak it, and make some changes, and do another revision.
Yep.
And another revision sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
And get it to a point where you like it.
Is the revision,
all your amps are essentially lunchboxes, kind of?
Yeah, a lot of
they're all small.
Yeah, I mean, even the 100-watt amps, like the VX100 and the V130, even the V140 isn't big. The 140 is in a taller sleeve just to give a bit of extra space for the reverb tank.
Yeah.
And, so that we can position it and try and keep it away from the transformer.
Yeah, it's always hard in the head.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
It would be.
So
It'd be tempting to put a digital reverb circuit in there, but people want a proper spring, so it's a nuisance, to put it mildly sometimes. But we get there in the end.
Right, for sure.
That's cool. I was going to ask, because I'm curious, Martin, how'd you get into all this?
It's a funny one, because I'm not. I've got no qualifications for electronics. I've got just an exam I came out of secondary school with, which was, we used to do O-levels, ordinary level exams. So I got O-level physics. That's my qualification. And I played guitar since I was 16. So I've been playing about 10 or 11 years. And a friend of mine had done a master volume mod on a 100-watt Marshall, and it was the one out the Tube Amp book, Aspen Pittman's book. And it's a post phase splitter type circuit. So that was really my first amp modification. I didn't know what I was doing, but it worked, and it sounded okay. But what it did highlight, once I was able then to turn the overdrive volume down on that particular, it was a 100-watt Marshall, was I found that it didn't sound right. There was something amiss, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I went through the whole circuit and just visually. And eventually, after lots of head scratching, it turned out that it had actually been built wrong at the factory.
Oh, I've never seen that.
Yeah, I saw it. And
I routinely find old Marshalls like that. Like, oh, look at this one. They put 0.1 caps across the entire board. Did they run out of 0.022s?
Yeah. Oh, marvelous. Yeah, but but it was that kind of thing. And where it was, unfortunately, it was a super lead. It was a 1969 one as well. I mean, this is going back 28, 29 years, and they weren't worth a lot of money, and they weren't popular then.
Yeah.
So I got it for about £80.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so
it
was really cool. And the problem was there was once you get to, I suppose it's like a mixer stage before the cathode follower, and the cathode resistor would normally be 820 ohms or a 1k there, and it was a 10k but hidden under a 680 nanofarad, so I couldn't see the value of it. And that combination, if you have a capacitor too big across the 10k, it sounds horrible. You get some nasty harmonics and stuff going on there, and that was the problem.
Interesting. Well, we have just 1 second, Martin. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say, John Tome gave us a super chat. He says, "I bought amps from both you guys this year. Thanks for the fantastic products."
Oh, nice one.
Thanks, John, for the
thank you.
super chat. Yeah. Sorry, Martin. I didn't want to interrupt you there, but
no, I think I'd probably got to the end of my point. But yes, I've heard all sorts of funny stories once, because I was quite surprised to find that it had been, that it was wrong. But I've, like Dave says, I've come across it since that. It's almost like in certain places they have run out of certain components, so they've just used something else just to keep production going till they get a delivery.
wow.
Yeah, like I've seen plate resistors that are supposed to be 100Ks and they're 82Ks.
Yeah.
Literally every 100K resistor in the amp was an 82K because they ran out.
Yeah.
I've seen the filtering stage miswired, where one of the wires on the board was not from the last stage, but the one before in the last stage was just sitting there not doing anything.
Oh,
All sorts of crazy stuff.
Wow.
What I saw recently was the 0.1 caps across almost the whole board.
No,
I'm like, really? Original too.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen that. I had a master volume. So it's 1976 but with not with rocker switches, with the sort of plastic toggle switches. So they're like a plastic lever on them. And after the phase splitter, that was there were 100 nanofarads after there, but the bias feed resistors were 82k, which I hadn't seen on anything else. Again, they must have run out of 220s.
That's wild. That's one good thing about, I guess, modern production is a bit more consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah, those old amps, it's funny, people say, well, no two sound the same. I go, yeah, it's because no two are the same. If you make them the same, then they'll probably sound very close.
Yeah, very true. Yes. And there's a lot, I don't know what your opinion is, but a lot of people rave about the old amps, but there are probably as many bad ones as there are good ones. And you're not guaranteed, if you spend a lot of money on a 60s or 70s Marshall, it's not guaranteed to sound good.
No, sometimes they need to be serviced and made the right spec that the person's looking for, and sometimes you need to, generally speaking, you can coax them into being good as long as they have a good set of transformers.
I think so.
It's generally some other problem with the circuit or something, but some are a little bit better than others.
Yeah. I have come across probably one or two in the time I've been sort of modifying or repairing them where they didn't sound great, and I struggled with them. It was almost like there was, because people were just wanting them really to be up to just standard. They didn't need to be modified or anything like that, but they just said this doesn't sound right, and it was very difficult to find out why they didn't sound good. But that's probably, that could have even been 20 years ago now, so it may well be that now I might find the problem, but nothing seemed wrong. The transformers were putting out the correct voltages, the choke was right, the filter caps were all new, all the components on the board were within what they were the correct values, etc., but somehow it just didn't sound good, and never got to the bottom of it. And it's I've never got to the bottom of it. I can describe the sound. Have you heard Let There Be Rock? I think it is by AC/DC. And can you remember the guitar sound on there? And it's got a slightly discordant. It's a bit discordant to my ears, the overdrive. And it was that, only much worse. And I never got to the bottom of why.
I'll have to go back and listen.
Yeah, have a listen, and it's if you if you notice what I'm talking about, and that's the only way I can describe it, is discordant. Even on single notes, it's I don't know what it is. I mean, it could be things like ceramic caps, I suppose. Some of those old type ceramic caps can sound broken almost.
Yeah.
I don't mind, some of the modern ones, they're fine, the Murata and things like that, they're okay, but some of them can sound quite they can seemingly withstand the right voltages and stuff like that, but they I don't know, they're just physically, I think they probably even start to move when you get a reasonably large signal applied to them. Something goes funny, but I think that's a thing that they, just sometimes they don't sound good.
Interesting. So,
my
so once you got into the mod and everything like that, what took you down the path of building amps and from there?
It was a strange one. I probably built one or two amps, and then I used to play in the local band, and Paul Cornford, he used to sell used cars, and one of the other guys in the band used to go and visit him every week to redo the advert in the local paper. So the other guy in the band worked for the local newspaper. He'd go and see Paul, and Paul had some pictures of guitars in his office. And so they got chatting, and the other guy in the band, Gordon, said, well, you should come and see our band. And so I got to know Paul like that. And then one day I needed to buy a car from him. And so I went to see him, and he said, are you still doing guitar lessons, which is how I was making a living largely in those days. So I said yes, and I went round, we did some guitar lessons. And then one day I went to do his guitar lesson, and he'd got hold of I think it was a 1961 Fender Princeton. So a tweed Princeton with a 10-inch speaker in it, slightly bigger than a Champ, but the same circuit. And all we did all afternoon was play that rather than do any guitar lesson, because it was brilliant. You could plug into it, turn all the volume up, and there was a tone control, and that was it. So turn everything up to 10 and then do everything off the guitar's volume, and it would get a little bit bloated. So the bass response when you're using overdrive it's probably fine, but it's a valve rectifier, so it would struggle a bit on the low end and sound a bit farty, or however you describe it. Mm-hmm. And because Paul knew that the amps that he'd seen me using, I'd modified myself. He said, do you think you could copy that? And he sort of had an idea that perhaps he wanted to get out of the car trade and into something different. I said, well, I can copy it, but I think it's probably not. It's only 4.5 watts, but it's not practical. It's still too loud. You can still annoy people with 4.5 watts. And so I said, I probably do some extra stuff and put a master volume and probably more of a toned circuit. But the other thing I had to do was find out how to calculate the gap in the output transformer, because it was a single-ended output stage. And because there's DC, you can saturate the core. So I had to find out how big the gap between the E and the I laminations had to be. So that was kind of a learning curve, a steepish learning curve, but worth it. Because I could design a push-pull output transformer, but not the single-ended one. So I ended up, we made the Harlequin. So that was the first amp. That's roughly how it came about, really, and how I got into actually building amps, because we made the Harlequin and got it reviewed in Guitarist magazine and went from there.
What year is this?
That was 98, I think, when it actually got reviewed. So probably from through 97, I did some prototypes of the Harlequin, and I think we tried it with a single EL34. We tried the first output transformer. When I took the drawing to the transformer company, I think they hadn't quite understood the purpose of the output transformer and thought that it would have mains on it. And so they said that they would have to do it on a dual section bobbin and all the rest of it, which meant the flux linkage was terrible. And the top end response was quite smooth, actually, because of the poor flux linkage. But because it was so bad, there were certain notes, high frequency or higher on the guitar register, so it's not even high frequency, where I had to put a diode between the anode of the EL84 we used and the chassis, because I'd get an arc otherwise. And that was just down to them not understanding what was required of the output transformer. So I had to go back and say, this is probably dangerous, this output transformer. And so they made it again, but with concentric sections. And then so that was the output transformer sorted, and then I just made a few prototypes until we got one that we like the sound of.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, 'cause I remember getting Guitarist magazine and Total Guitar magazine back in those days, and seeing Cornford amps and the reviews and the ads and everything there.
Yeah.
So that was, never played one though until I saw one used in Guitar Center one day. That was like the only time I was like, oh wow, a Cornford amp. It's like, what a surprise. I did play through it. It sounded great. It was very Marshallish.
Which one was that? Would that be an MK50 perhaps, or was it?
Honestly, I don't remember what it was, but I just, it was just there in the use section. And I plugged into it.
MK50 sounded good.
Yeah, the amp sounded great. Yeah, it was a good amp. So that's cool. So how long were you with Cornford then?
Well, I think we were going for about 10 years, I suppose, something like that. Yeah, so Paul and I started it, and yeah, I suppose we went from two of us working he had a double garage in the bottom of his garden to begin with, and then we moved to some industrial premises nearer, and yeah, that's as advanced, I suppose, as it got. And we had probably, what did we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 7 or 8 amps in the catalogue, if you can call it a catalogue. But by the end, things went pear-shaped, and a group of people that thought it was a shame that Cornford had disappeared, but believed that I would be able to design, or should continue doing so as well, amps, sort of got behind it. And so none of them were, none of them are loaded in terms of none of them are particularly rich guys, but they just thought, well, I'm prepared to offer X amount to get you started. And so that's really how it all started again, as Victory.
And is this the guys that the Straight Edge, basically, were they involved? Or
well, I work for
Straight Edge, right?
For Straight Edge, yes. So I'm the designer at Full Victory, but I work for Straight Edge, and so they do make the Victory amps.
Yeah.
Now, does Andertons have anything to do with the Victory?
No, it's quite a common question. Now, Lee, I've known Lee since my Cornford days, and he particularly liked. He used to do quite well with the MK50 Mark II, so that's the one that had the clean channel as well, and the Carrera, which was like the Harlequin. It was a single-ended output stage, but there you could switch between an EL84 or 6L6 or whatever you wanted to put in there, really. And so his involvement, if you can call it that, is that I will very often, almost always, pick his brains in terms of when I've got a new design. What do you think? Will it sell? And so, and I'll just sort of get him to, I suppose, advise, because I might think it sounds okay, and you know, with Cornford, that's, you know, when I thought it was ready, then it was ready. Or, you know, when Paul and I thought it was ready, it was ready. But now I think I think that the trouble is people, they're not misled, but I think they've got a funny idea, perhaps, or yeah, they've got a strange idea, perhaps, of what a certain amp sounds like. So I'll give an example because I think it's quite a good example. Dave's designs they're kind of Marshall-esque, but they're much more user-friendly, and they sound, and I'll be honest, I've only ever managed to plug into a PT20, but I've been in the room when I've heard others played, and I think Dave does the same as me. They've got to sound good at all volumes, and it's an important thing that when you've come up with a new design, it's almost got to be able to be used at a gig, but it's got to have the demo room sound as well. So if you go into a shop or a store and say, I'd like to try this amplifier, and they kind of lock you in a little booth that's, you know, 4 foot by 4 foot, you've got to be able to get a sound at a low volume. And a lot of people are under the impression that they'll hear a proper old 100-watt Marshall or 50-watt Marshall on a record, and they don't really know how that comes about, and they don't know that that amplifier has been turned up really loud, and if you went to try one of those in this day and age, if you were put in a demo booth and you turned it up to sound like that, you get told off, and the shop bloke could be in there telling you to turn your amp down. Can you turn it down, please? Because I can't hear myself talking on the phone or whatever. So you've got to these days make an amplifier that can be used at all volume levels and have a good sound, I think. And so that's I always try and it's not an artificial thing, because some people may only be able to afford one amplifier, and so that you've got to make it, you know, even if it is a 100-watt amplifier, it might have to be their practice amp too. So it's got to sound, you've got to try and get it to sound good and feel good as well at low volumes as well as high volumes. And so, you know, that's always a thing I'm conscious of. And even though I think I've got it right, I do like to get other people's opinions.
Market research is a good thing.
Yeah,
it is. It's necessary. I'd say we managed okay, really, without it, or without market research to the level that we do it at Victory. But I think it's a necessity, just to because if you build an amp, and Dave will know this, you'll know how to set it up, and you'll know what to do to get the sound that you want and the feel that you want. But what you have to do is, and sometimes it's very difficult not to try and interfere, but sometimes you have to just give it to someone and let them do what they want with it, and then see if a good sound comes out.
I always sort of say, if you can set everything at half, half, and right away you get a good sound, that's a good thing, you know, or at least that's a good thing for the average person, because the average person might do that. And
that's right.
So I always kind of keep that in mind. But everything else you said, the feel at lower volumes and all of that is exactly the same way I feel. So
yeah, I think it's, you know, because anything else, if somebody doesn't have to, if somebody's not having to fight with their guitar, that the overall experience of trying that amplifier in a shop will then encourage them to buy it. You know, if it's got the kind of sound they're after and it's actually making their job easier, then I think that goes a long way. Because I've been to shops with my friends over the years, and you know, they've plugged in and I'm listening and I'm thinking that's a good sound, and then I have a go and it's actually the amp's hard work.
Right.
And so you have to think, well, that, you know, that could be made easier. But I think some manufacturers have the facility to, you know, probably even have people in the, you know, members of staff that can play all instruments, so they can actually put the amp into a band situation as part of the R&D at the factory. But then the trouble is that only tells you whether the amp works live and works at high volumes.
Right.
So I think what Dave does, I believe, and what I do is you've got to be able to do that with an amp too.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. Hey, we've got a super chat from Freaks Arise Rich Wood. I appreciate that. He says, Martin, I've been building tube amps for a few years at home. I've been trying to learn about SMPS like in your V4 preamp pedals, but it seems to be the most challenging topic to find. Can you give any insights?
Well, I'm
good luck.
Interesting, because they're a nuisance, those things, and we use switch mode supply to get the high voltage on all of the V4 pedals. That's been fine, but yeah, I don't know, because I'm not very expert. I've managed to get some that work and I know how they work, but the biggest nuisance is noise problems with interference kind of getting along earth like on the copper paw. You know, you have to be careful if you ground something to an earth plane or a ground plane, that you sometimes you'll get interference there, which won't, I mean, those things switch at, you know, over 250 kilohertz, 500 kilohertz, and which is, you wouldn't hear that, but sometimes they manifest themselves in other ways with the way that the chips themselves, the switching chips, control themselves, and so you get all sorts of horrible noises, and they're a nuisance. And the only advice with those that I can offer is that keep the earthing separate. So for any voltage, so with the high voltage, we've got a switch mode supply on those. For the 9 volts, we've got a switch mode supply, and I'm trying to keep all the earths or all the grounds separate, so that it doesn't find its way into the audio. That's about all I can say, really. Yeah. That my circuits, they're not mind blowing. They're just literally, I'll look at a data sheet and look at how it is, you know, how you're advised to use it, and do the calculations to get the voltages I want. So I'm probably doing exactly the same thing as his name's disappeared, but I would imagine I'm doing exactly the same thing as him, or he's doing the same as me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they can be a nuisance, but I don't know what if he's got a particular problem, but the internet's very handy, and also that, you know, if you want to sort of get more in depth, there are even lectures on boost converters or buck converters and how they work. We use a chip for the high voltage. We use a chip called a Max 1771, which is handy just because you don't need many other components with it, and so then it doesn't take up much space on the board. yeah, so that's not much advice, but I just know that they can be a nuisance because I'm currently experiencing that. And you know, have a look on the internet and see what you can find, but keep the earth, if you can, keep the earth separate and keep it away from, although you do, they're surprisingly not as the interference you get, radiated stuff from the inductors and things like that you think might get picked up by a valve or something like that, they don't seem to be too bad for that. It's actually the switching noise, I believe, that is finding its way, you know, along the ground plane. So separate earths for any of the voltages. So if you've got high voltage switch mode circuit, keep that earth separately to the chassis, if that helps.
No, that's great. Great advice. Thank you. Wyatt Willis, thanks for the super chat. Thanks for doing this, guys. Mr. Kidd, love all your amps. For Dave, did the SL67 you modded a couple months ago have a full wave bridge rectification like a 100 watt? Is this a hassle doing a 50 watt plexi?
I never modded an SL67, so
yeah, I was going to say that doesn't.
So I don't know, but an SL67, from what I'm told, although I have never been in one, is a full wave bridge, unlike normal 50 watt amp would be. There's no need to mod an old amp to be the full wave bridge. There's no real purpose. I mean, just leave it. It's not going to be a crazy difference. You know, you'd have to have a custom transformer done if you did that. Yeah. So, or you could use a 100 watt transformer.
Yeah.
Vivhas Patel, thanks for the super chat. David Martin, to what extent does voltage affect an amp? I played played the same make of an amp for both 120 volt and 230, and they sound a bit different. Do you have to alter your designs to fix this?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think really the voltage is any different. It's the hertz that causes it to sound maybe slightly different. Although I've heard my amps in both, like I've heard my amps in England, I've heard my amps in different places, and they don't sound that much different to me. Because you got to understand, it's basically the transformer is just converting the voltage to the voltages that you need. So if it's set at 120, it just receives 120 volts and then gives you whatever those voltages are of the transformer out. If you switch it to 240, it's the same voltages out. So it's the same. The only difference is the hertz. And I don't know how to explain that, though. Maybe Martin can explain that better.
No, I can't.
Okay, well, there we go.
The only thing I would say is that whilst you might think you're getting 120 volts or 110 volts out of the wall, I have come across, I've had a few emails over the years where people they've kind of complained or noticed that their amps, you know, they bought it from the UK and then they've just literally taken it to the US, put the proper mains fuse in it, switched the voltage selector to work at 120 and switched it on, thinking that it's being supplied with 120, but sometimes the wall voltage is possibly 127 seems to be a common, so it's high, so the plate voltage is high, but it may be that then the bias voltage is more negative, and so the amp's actually cold biased, and it's not because it's been incorrectly biased from the factory. It just needs to be set up. So there's, depending on how loud you run the amp, that could be one explanation. And possibly the mains frequency, because the US is 60 hertz. So in theory, the transformer runs a bit cooler. It's not working as hard because of the higher frequency mains input. So that may it may mean that transformer can work more efficiently in the US, but to be honest, as Dave pointed out, I've heard my amps in the UK and in the US, and I can't really hear a lot of difference.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, yeah, is like even when we ship amps to various countries, generally, what is really the voltage in those countries is the question. Yeah. I know there's supposed to be a standard of 230 volts.
Yeah.
I find that is just not the case, generally speaking.
No, it isn't.
Generally, it's higher.
Yeah.
And like in Australia, it's really high.
Yeah.
Even over 240 sometimes.
Oh, but well, in where I'm sitting here, I could probably. It's night or it's dark now, so everyone's got their lights and stuff. But during the day, I can measure 250 coming out of the wall here.
See, that's the thing.
Yeah,
and it's crazy for a U.S. manufacturer. You're trying to set these amps to be at the proper voltage, but the funny thing, and the bias, is set at a certain voltage. So, I mean, for us, that would be 120 or 240. Yeah. Unless the country is specifically a 220 volt country, and then we switch it to 220. But then I always doubt what it is. I always have people measure, and I've heard all sorts of stories.
Yeah.
So most amps we set at 240, and that's where we set them amp. But realistically, the amp should sort of be biased for once it's in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, it should.
Really, that's the better idea.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you ship an amp that's 240, and then it's really 230 in the country, that's 10 volts less, your bias is going to be low, your plate voltage is a little lower, but you could get your bias up and sound better.
Yeah, so. Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I don't know, it's difficult. I suppose we understand that, but some, I suppose, unless you can't really, you can't have I say you can't. There are manufacturers. I think the Mesa Boogie were well known for it, and the 5150, the first 5150s, the bias wasn't adjustable, and they work, and they're not going to sound terrible, but they're not necessarily going to be at their optimum.
Yeah, I agree with that. Servando Flores, thanks for the super chat. Martin, the VX100 and the V140 are the best amps I've ever played, along with the BE100 Deluxe. Thanks so much for what you do. Can you give any insight on the design process for the VX100?
The VX100, that was the instance when I was told, it was put to me, shall we make an amplifier, a metal amplifier, that can do classic rock, but also the high gain 5150 type sound. And so I said yes, because I like that challenge. As soon as somebody says, can you do this, then I say yes, and then I decide how I'm going to do it. But the thing for me is always, one thing I definitely know when given a new design brief is that I'm not going to copy anyone else's design, because I get no satisfaction from it. So some people they've come to me at the NAMM show and they say, so the VX100, that's a copy of a JCM 800 and a copy of a 5150 in one box, and that isn't the case. But those kinds of sounds are what I'm after. So the design process was really, I made a prototype. It was actually an amp prototype that I already had, and I just modified it. And then Rabir Massad, who you've probably seen in a lot of the VX100 or Kraken videos, was given the onerous task of critiquing my work, and it didn't take too long, actually. It didn't I think I'd got fairly close to what we were after. The one thing that I perhaps misunderstood or missed the point is a very popular thing with with a metal amp or an amp used for metal is people love a tube screamer to tighten the sound, even if it's fairly tight sounding already. People love to have that thing that just rolls off some more bass, helps the attack, helps that feel in the hand. So I didn't want to pinch a tube screamer circuit, and there wasn't room for it, so I used a high voltage FET to get that sound. The idea was Rabeer's favorite setup was a Marshall JCM 900 dual reverb, and so I said to him that the overdrive there, that's all. It's like it might as well be a Marshall Governor with a power amp. That's a little bit unfair, but it gets you in it gives you the idea that the overdrive channel on the JCM, well, the preamp on the JCM 900 is largely solid state until you get to the tone stack. So I had to point that out, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to use valves. So I got something that sounded, I didn't really go for that sound. I kind of wanted just a classic rock, Marshall-y, not very high gain, one that you could perhaps, if you wanted to do a whole gig with just the lower gain sound on the Kraken as it was to begin with. That was the idea, that was the thinking, if you like, behind the gain 1. And then gain 2, the higher gain, I wanted to get something like the 5150 sound, but not use loads of valves, not use loads of 12AX7s in the preamp. That I don't know. I don't know why there are so many. I mean, the original 5150 only had 5, I think, in the amp, but you don't need lots of valve stages to get that kind of overdrive. You can get in more than enough gain, I'm sure, with just 4 stages. And so that was something I thought was important, not to go overboard with loads of preamp valves, just to give the impression from a marketing point of view that there's lots of valves, therefore there's lots of gain, because you only need 4 stages, and perhaps if you want to add a 5th stage or a cathode follower to drive the tone stack. But so that was kind of my thinking. It was a sound that I was after, and I had a good idea already when I was when it was suggested that shall we do a metal amp. I thought, yeah, we can do that, and I've got a good idea how to do it. And so that was pretty much it. And then just taking it and getting Rabeer's opinion, because it's the kind of music he plays. And he's got baritone guitars, and it's just something he's better at. There's a lot of that stuff, the gent stuff, that I don't do. I could, I suppose, if I wanted to sit down and develop a technique, but it's not something I do. And so it's just handy to have somebody that does do it, and somebody that can then take a prototype off to other players of that ilk and producers of that ilk to see what they think of it. So again, the market research from that side of it was interesting, and particularly with the original Kraken, people would immediately have a tube screamer at hand, almost like putting salt on your dinner before you've tasted it. You know, it's almost something that they feel is almost that it's got to be there, and just to switch on, even if you know, even before they've listened sometimes, or they'll do a little bit and then they'll put the tube screamer on and they're happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people like
it's not about extra gain even or anything like that. It's the EQ thing and the sort of just tightening up the bass end even further.
Hey, I just want to I pulled up your website. I figured I'd share the website for you guys so you guys can some of their products. So you want to talk about some of these things, maybe, Martin?
If you like, yes.
Yeah, sure. So what is the Duchess? Can you tell us about that?
Well, the Duchess originally, the first amp, if you like, in that family was the V40, and the idea was really to make a clean amplifier that would overdrive a little bit, but was really an amplifier that would suit people that got the sound from pedals or that did lots of different sorts of gigs where they need an amplifier but not one. It's almost like a blank canvas. Most of what you hear coming out isn't the amp, it's the pedals that they use. So the original V40 was a lunchbox pedal platform amp, is the best way to put it. And then we did a deluxe version because the trouble with a lunchbox amp is, even if people go to a shop and plug in and like it, sometimes they can't bring themselves to buy it because it doesn't look very traditional. You get people that would come in and they'd be after something Fendery, and so they would try Fenders and they'd try this and that, and they try a V40, and the V40 wouldn't necessarily be the one that they'd go for, and we discovered it was partly because of its appearance. And so the deluxe, we decided that we'd just add some more features that's expected perhaps or associated with that kind of amplifier. So we added, on the deluxe, we added tremolo and a spring reverb instead of the digital that's on the V40 lunchbox. And then the Duchess was the V4 powered pedal. We talked about having like a power amp, if you like, for people's V4 pedals, but that the Duchess came about because we thought, well, it would be handy to have a pedal platform amp that would fit on a pedal board, and so that's how that came about. It's got a very similar preamp to the V40. Interestingly, the mid-range on the V4 pedal platform amp, the Duchess that you can see the picture of there, is there's a lot more available in the mid-range than on the heads themselves, and I think that's because the plate voltage on the valves, they're different valves for a start. So we use an EC 900 and then 3 EF 91s or CV4014s in the preamp of the powered pedal there, and because of the lower plate voltage, the waveform distorts differently when it starts to distort, and so you get a nicer mid-range where there's more of it on the pop. So that's really how that whole family of amplifiers is designed at people that want a pedal platform or that want to be able to make an easy fly rig.
Gotcha. And then the jack's pretty similar to that.
Yeah, the jack was where it all started. Really, was the V30 that we made for Guthrie, that wanted an amplifier that would fit in an EasyJet overhead locker. So the first thing was the footprint. That was the most important thing. It had to be no bigger than whatever it is, and just had 2 channels, a clean and an overdrive channel. And then the jack pedal came about because if I mean the V4 pedals are designed to take over the preamp of your existing amplifier. So they work best if your amp's got an effects loop, because you can then it switches so that your signal goes through the V4 and into the power amp of your whatever amplifier you have, and then when you turn it off, you bypass that pedal and the signal changes just as it wouldn't be normally. So if you've got an amplifier, say you might have I'll try and find it. Say, for instance, you might have a reissue JCM 800. Some of those have got loops. And so then you've got a higher gain sound and a clean sound if you added one of those to your JCM 800.
Right. That's cool.
As an example. So that's how that family of amplifiers, so the Jack series, was the V30. I think they called it a Countess. I'll be quite honest with you, I can't remember how some of the names of our amplifiers came about in the early days, but the Jack, visually the graphics fit better, but it is that amplifier and that pedal is more of a jack of all trades type of. It's a clean sound and an overdrive sound, and that's what it's just a useful tool.
Well, there you go, jack of all trades. There, it fits the name, right? Then we got the Copper series, the Sheriff series, and then the Kraken series. So how do those 3 differ?
The one popular question when I'd be on the stand, because Victory doesn't have a signature sound per se. Most Victory amplifiers, all Victory amps, probably bar the V30, are my take on a particular style of amplifier. People would say, what's the closest you've got to an AC30, a Vox AC30? And I'd say, well, we don't have anything like that. And so that's how the Copper series came about. So that's got 4 EL84s. In high power, though, we've got a mixture of bias and technologies. So it's not just cathode biased, it's fixed bias as well. Only because we use a transformer and the core size is what you'd expect, in fact, for a 50-watt amplifier, the actual core area. But running that cathode bias, that could get quite hot still for EL84s because of the other windings. We've got a low voltage winding and a bias winding. But the idea of that amplifier is to try and elicit something voxy. But Vox, an AC30 sound could be Hank Marvin and a kind of, our version of surf music, I suppose, or it could be Brian May. So that's quite a vast spectrum of guitar tones. So in that, ideally, you can probably find something you're looking for, something Vox inspired that you're looking for within that in that amplifier. We do the lunchbox version that doesn't have the tremolo, and it has just a digital reverb, and then that one's got the spring and a tremolo that modulates the output valve bias. So that's how that came about, just because people asked.
Right.
And then the Sheriff, that kind of speaks for itself, I would imagine, just because of the color scheme. But again, that was my take on a Marshall. My idea was to be able to get a Marshall sound, but have control over the volume. Really, it's not. It's different to Dave's approach, and on that amplifier, and it's a thing I've used actually on the V40 amps. Also on the copper and on the Sheriff, there is a post phase splitter master volume, because a lot of, when you hear power amp distortion, a lot of that power amp distortion is the phase splitter and not just the output valves. And so that's what the Sheriff has, is a post phase splitter master volume, but that has thrown a spanner in the works with the fact that it's got an effects loop. But to me, that was a good way of getting a Marshall-y sound. So it's not very high gain, I don't think, but it's got. I tried to get that sort of. It's a cleaner overdrive, but with the touch sensitivity that you can get from, say, a 50-watt Marshall turned up, you know, loud. So that was the idea, and you know, so it's not like Dave's approach to getting that sound is different, and probably yeah, it's a different. I think I wasn't going for so much of the higher gain sounder, because I think Dave's amps have got that lovely smooth sound at all volumes, whereas the Sheriff hasn't initially. So people sometimes will plug in and expect the kind of higher gain hot rodded Marshall sound, and the Sheriff initially doesn't have that. You just got to kind of get used to it, and you know, used to the feel of it. But that, yeah, that was the idea. Just something that sounded Marshall-y, but with control over the volume.
And then you have the Kraken series. Yeah,
which I sort of went
right.
I sort of went through a little bit earlier, but that's and then the Artist series, which we only have one of those, is the RK, which I think I've got a feeling, because that was kind of designed, there was a kind of remote design process. I made a prototype, sent it to Richie, and then he said he liked this and that about it. And one thing was he definitely wanted one tone control. And so I tried to be clever and do something that affected the mid-range and the treble. And
that amp sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yes,
I worked on his.
Yes, I know. Yes, that's right. You did
valve, just a preamp tube.
Yeah. Yes, and but also I've got a feeling he thought there was something wrong. There was something offensive about the treble. And what? I'll be right back. Oh yes, I know what it was. It was to do with the. I don't know if you've noticed on some high gain amps, you get a half, like somebody's got a wah pedal and they've just sort of rolled it back a little bit from the treble. Yeah. And that amp had that kind of artifact, if you like, that thing about the tone which he wasn't keen. But it was really a lack of communication when you're talking about sound. The sound of something. It's difficult to sometimes understand the adjectives people are using.
Yes.
And I think he during the design process, I think he was rehearsing near your workshop possibly. And I think he popped in to say, what do you think of this? And I think you couldn't actually find anything wrong with it. But all of a sudden it dawned on me that's what he was talking about, that kind of half-cocked wah pedal sound. And so what I got him to do was actually just take a pair of pliers inside and snap off 2 capacitors. And that got rid of it. Because I put like a small one on the cathode resistor on the 3rd gain stage, and then I'd put one across the anode resistor just to roll off some of the treble boost that it got. But it kind of gave a sort of peak. And so like that, it opened it up, it flattened out the frequency response.
Yeah, that just sounded, I mean, when you cranked it up through my cabinet, it sounded really great right away. So
yeah, thank you very much.
I thought it was cool sounding. I love the simplicity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll be absolutely honest with you. When he said about one tone control, I was concerned, but I thought people like, he's got a huge fan base, so people will be interested. And then tremolo and all of that, if it was a clean amp, then it made sense to me. But the fact that we wanted to be able to also get a lead sound from the amplifier, that I thought there was quite a unique set of a unique feature set, I suppose. But so I was dubious, I have to say, if I'm honest. But and of course the RK100 is in an entirely different amp. That is very much like a Marshall Super Lead, but it's got one input. And if you want to bridge, you know, the bridging thing where you go from the bottom left to the top right input with the patch cable, it doesn't do that. But you just literally run the normal channel and the brighter channel in parallel. So there's no attenuation of the input signal. And you can also switch out that bright cap that on the treble channel of the super leads, which I think there was a video on Instagram of Richie, and he just propped his phone up somewhere, I think, and just plugged it into a 4x12 cabinet, said, right, let's give this a go. And he was sort of knelt down by the, you know, about a foot away from the speaker cabinet, and he just turned up the high treble channel, and it nearly knocked him over because they're spiteful. So what we did on the second iteration was it's got a post phase splitter master. So if you don't want it there, just turn the master all the way up, and then it's like it's not there. And I put a switch on it to get rid of the that bright capacitor across because it's 5 nanofarads across the volume control. So you can switch that out, and it's a little less spiteful.
Yeah, right.
That's cool.
Yeah, unless you have those all the way up, that's very painful.
It is. I think you've got to go. I think you've probably got to be on those past about 2 o'clock. Then it's getting.
It's okay.
Then it's okay, but before that, they are spiteful.
Question from Wyatt Willis: can you talk about the signature prototype you built for Zakk Wylde?
I can. It was really cosmetic. Was the only difference between that and his, because he loves a JCM 800, and so I built literally that. I built a JCM 800 master volume circuit. The power supply circuit was slightly different, higher plate voltage, 4 6550s, and just the when I say it was cosmetic, both the output and mains transformer were potted, and to have the I think it was Black Label Audio was going to go on them. I can't remember. I can't remember. It's a different. The company name I think changed since I built his company name changed, and what else was different? power supply was slightly different, as I said, and just the layout of the valves, so that the 4 output valves had 3 gaps, and so in each gap a preamp valve went. So when you looked at, not actually right in each gap, but they were a certain distance away from the output valve, so we had to inside put a screening bracket because the output valve circuit would have been far too close to the preamp circuit, and it, you know, if you cranked it up past a certain point, it became unstable. And so, but that's it. Otherwise, there was nothing different between that and the standard, you know, JMP master volume circuit that they put in the JCM 800s in the 70s.
I made a prototype also.
Did you? You made one for him?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I did something for him too, and the business model was a little weird, what he wanted to do, so it never really came into fruition, and he wanted it at a certain price point that was hard to reach.
Oh, that's interesting. So you probably did yours much later than I did mine.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so. And then I think I haven't tried one of because he's got a range of guitars and amplifiers now, and I haven't tried the amplifiers because it always amazes me that his sound is really a JCM 800 and
an overdrive pedal.
Yeah, it's an overdrive, which it's like a Boss overdrive, I think.
Well, originally, yeah, it was this Boss Super Overdrive, but then MXR made a version of it for him.
That's right, yeah. But it's the same circuit, I think, yeah.
And the prototype I built has that pedal in it.
Oh, right, okay.
Switchable. So.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But,
no, that's quite interesting, that is. I didn't know you'd done that, so that's something we have in common, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've known Zakk a long time, so.
All right.
But the business model didn't work, so.
No.
Here's a question from Plexico. Thanks for the super chat. Greetings, gang. Any Guthrie Govan insight on amp tones over the years?
It's a funny one, actually. I don't think. Yeah. I think it really for Guthrie. I'm just trying to think what his first. I think the first amp he had that I made was an MK50, and so he would. Yeah, so the MK50 it was really a 1-channel amplifier with a switchable gain boost and 2 master volumes. And so to get a clean sound, you'd have to put it on the lower gain setting, so switch the boost off, and probably put it on the higher master volume setting, and then do things off the volume control of the guitar. And then he played in the town where I live, Whitstable. He came down with the Fellowship, which was his kind of jazz band, I suppose. Jazz fusion band, and we had probably the first. I'm just trying to think whether I think it may well have been the first production Hellcat, and so that was our EL84 based output stage, and 2 channels, kind of a crunchy channel and a higher gain channel with spring reverb, and he used that with a 335, which was an unusual combination to see Guthrie with at the time, and that was one of the nicest tones I've heard him get. But that was, I haven't seen him play live a lot. I've seen him, I've seen recordings of it, but by the time the guitar sound finds its way out the front, things have been done. To EQ it, take the lower end off if necessary, etc. So, but I don't know. Guthrie gets a sound, and I think for him, I'm guessing that it's not just about the tone. I think it's, you know, if he gets a tone he's happy with, that's fine, but it's then all about the feel of it. You know, and you know, if it's a sound that, I'm not saying that people rely on heaps of gain to cover up bad technique, because obviously that isn't Guthrie. He's he doesn't do that. But,
he's such an amazing player.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes. Yeah. It'd be very interesting to see what goes on in his mind when he's playing. I think it would be very interesting indeed, and interesting probably in a similar way to Alan Holdsworth. You know, although Guthrie's guitar playing to me is far more accessible than Alan Holdsworth. I think the thought processes going on in those two players, it would be fascinating if they could even explain it, and perhaps they don't really. It's just something they do. But yes, so Guthrie, you know, he has certain requirements, and there's certain things he likes. And when we developed the MK, not the MK, the V30 Mark II Victory, we'd sort of gone a long way developing it. You know, we decided that we would add this, that, and the other. And then we thought, well, perhaps it would be a good idea for Guthrie to have a play through it just to see what his opinion is. And I think the Mark II was so far removed from the Mark I that it was a very good idea to get Guthrie involved, and we should have done it at the beginning and saved ourselves a lot of time and prototyping. Because you know, he immediately pointed out that it was really a long way removed, and some of the things really it didn't fit the name V30 Mark II. I think that was the, you know, it was okay as an amplifier in its own right, but it was so far different from the Mark I version, and so there were lots of things that I took out because the Mark I version doesn't have any negative feedback. And you know, there were a few things. I think it was quite a bassy amplifier, and that was in an effort. Really, it's probably the wrong way to go about it, but it worked for Guthrie, and so we left it. But it's quite bassy, and the original Mark I, a lot of people would struggle with that, or even think that it was that it had a problem. But the idea was that to try and get a big sound out of a little box, and that may seem a funny way to go about it, but it kind of worked, and it worked for Guthrie, and that was the main thing, that Guthrie was able to use it, but other players would buy them and they'd like them, but there would be some people would have an issue with the amount of low end, which I've heard Dave talk about on some of your designs, Dave. You like to, that's something you bear in mind, that you don't want too much bass end, or not in the preamp.
Well, yeah, the problem, generally speaking, with too much gain in a preamp is it starts getting muddy. Yep. And you want to limit the low end frequencies, just sort of like the Tube Screamer does for metal guys.
Yep.
And doing that, I think you get a better tone at a lower volume.
Yes.
You know, that's what I've discovered.
Yeah. And it feels easier to use because you get that attack. You know, the you know, it doesn't get masked by the bass frequencies, but also I think the power supply can respond quicker.
Yeah, I find that if there's too much low end in the front end, a lot of times on higher gain things, it sounds like the notes are, just to put it simply, sort of tripping over each other. They're not, they can't, it's not flowing properly.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite a good description of it, actually. And I've heard that. I've even heard people's guitar sounds live, where I'm just trying to think one in particular. It just came across. It may have been. I think it may have been. But don't quote me on this, even though I'm going to say it on the internet. I went to see Thin Lizzy, and the guitar sound Scott Gorham had seemed to be, and it may have been just how it was coming through the PA, but it seemed to be suffering from that, or the way it was coming across. But I know what you mean. It is almost like the gain is, you know, people want the overdrive to get the sustain and to make things easier, and to allow certain techniques to be used that with a clean sound they just wouldn't work. But sometimes too much gain, if there's too much low end, all of a sudden it's counterproductive, and it, yeah, like you say, it fights against itself, and the amp trips over itself, yeah, and can't keep up almost.
Interesting. We got Andertons.
Yeah.
Question from Martin. What's up? I assume this is Lee or one of the crew. Hope you guys are doing well. Question from Martin. Is there an artist that you've not worked with but you'd love to design an amp for, and why'd you pick that artist?
Well, the obvious, well, not the obvious, the obvious answer to anyone that knows me, of course, would have been Eddie Van Halen. But otherwise, yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's a tricky one, because I like so many guitar players, and for in so many genres, and so many that I think get a great sound for their style of music. So that's a very tricky one. Very tricky. I don't know that I have an answer for that. Yes, might have to be one of those come back to me, because I don't know, if I'm honest.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are so many guitar players that, you know, blues players, shredders, just sort of classic rock players, and you know, I think that it'd be fun for anyone to come to me and say, can you design me an amplifier?
Right.
And you know, and I'd love the challenge of that, you know, because it's a new amplifier design to me is a blank canvas. I mean, it'll probably be like so many of us that design amps. It will start off looking like something else I've done, and on paper probably won't, may not appear very different. But yeah, I don't know that I can give an answer to that, and only because I probably have to give about 10 answers, you know, and they have to be about, there'd have to be lots of people that I'd like to build an amp for.
No worries. That's good. Thanks for the question, Andertons. Make sure you guys check out Andertons online. Great videos, great stuff. Michael Torin, thank you for the super chat. Love the amp talk. When acquiring vintage gear, should you replace the filter caps if they look original? Also, is there a replacement guideline like every decade? Thank you for what you do. Thank you.
You or me?
Is that one for you, Dave?
Well, there's plenty of amps out there that still sound good that have the original filter caps. Not to say that it might not sound better with new filter caps. Generally speaking, like with Marshall amplifiers, old Marshall amplifiers, at this point, and when I mean old, I mean 1970s and earlier. At this point, I generally almost always will replace the filter caps. Generally speaking, I use F&T filter caps for that purpose. Very good quality cap, excellent cap. And generally speaking, that does breathe some life into it. Now, if a person loves how an amp sounds and doesn't really want to change it, maybe you leave the caps, because it can change it. Can make it a little stiffer, a little brighter, or a little so it's really just dependent. I mean, I sort of think you should change them. Now, how often on newer amps? I mean, again, it sort of depends on the amp and the kind of caps that were used in it originally, and I mean, I wouldn't think anything that's more modern needs filter caps replacing like right now. You know, like if it was made from the two, you know, even some of the 90s to now, I don't know. It's probably fine still.
Yeah.
Okay. Got another one, Cody Craig. I'm having a very hard time finding an amp that produces a sound in my head. Do you have any suggestions for looking? Got to go in your head, I guess.
Well, first of all, I need to crawl into your head and see what that would be. That's no information, so I don't know. I don't know what that sound is you're looking for.
No.
My suggestion would be contact guys like Dave and Martin and describe what you have in your head. Maybe they can steer you in the right direction.
Yeah.
So there was a question why we didn't bring up EVH.
But one thing about that, though, let me add something to that. The sound in your head, I might be able to tell you what that sound is if you tell me the tone, but you playing through let's say the exact amp that is that sound might not be the sound in your head, if that makes sense. Because you as a player, your hands sound different than everyone's hands. So here, I'll bring up Eddie Van Halen. If Eddie Van Halen plugged into a certain amp, he's going to sound like Eddie Van Halen, and it's going to sound really cool. But if you plug into that same amp, it might sound broken. I don't know. I have seen that happen. I have said this before on the show, where I know, especially like old Marshalls and things like that are not forgiving. Right. Someone will plug into an amp like that, and if their hands just don't, it's hard to explain. Even if their hands just don't have it, it just sounds awful. Yeah. They might be better off with a totally different amp to try to achieve sort of the same tone.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Here's a question. Tone Boner. That's questionable. Questionable name. Dave, how should I hook up a Runt 20 to a Torpedo Cab M? Cab M is not a load box. It has IRs, balanced out or speaker out. Does the Runt need the load?
Okay, so on the Runt, if you do not insert a speaker cable into the use first jack on the back, then there will be a load present. You can use the other speaker jack to feed your Cab M, just as long as there is no cable inserted into the use first speaker jack. So there you go, just a little cable from the other speaker jack into the Cab M, set it on speaker level. I think there's a switch for it, and you can use that little IR box to go to front of house with a load. And set your amp on 8 ohms if you do that too.
Okay, but the head still needs a load.
Well, I just explained that. There is a built-in load. If you do not plug in the use first speaker jack, it is active. You can use the other speaker jack to feed your Cab M.
Right.
Fine.
Gotcha. Okay. Just want to make sure he got that.
Yeah. Just make sure you do not have anything plugged into the use first jack.
Unless it's a speaker cabinet.
Yes.
Unless it's a speaker cabinet. Yes, you could have a speaker cabinet and do the same thing, but then you will obviously have sound coming out the speaker cabinet.
Okay, we got another one from Renan Silva. Thanks for the super chat. I remember Mr. Kidd saying the V50 was his favorite. It is mine. Did I dream it? Why discontinue this work of art? Is it still your favorite?
At the time, it probably, when Victory started, we started with 3 hand-wired amps. So we started with the V100, which we called a Duke to begin with, and then got into trouble for using that name because someone else had copyrighted the name. And we had the V50 and the V10, and out of the 3, the V50 was my favorite. But it wasn't popular. And I wonder whether, being a new company, a lot of people may not have known that I'd built amplifiers before, so it just wasn't popular. And yeah, I think that was it. It just wasn't popular. Those that bought them liked them, as is often the case with these things. But we just, they would sit around on the shelves for more than we'd like, and so we just decided, we took the view that we should probably discontinue it. It may be something we could revisit, but probably not as a hand wired. Perhaps we could revisit it as a lunchbox, or a PCB amplifier. But yes, it was just a view that was taken that it's not really popular. We get good feedback on those that have bought them, but we didn't sell lots, so that's why.
This is an interesting one. Synergy Kraken module. That's a winner. Have you seen the Synergy modules?
I have.
Okay.
I have.
That would be cool.
Yeah. They're quite, I don't know much about them. I've seen the kind of modular approach like that. I mean, way back in, I think it was, I've got can't remember.
Ignator did it first, and then it became Randall.
Yes, but was there someone that did it before? But they weren't so much. I think
Seymour
they were
Duncan?
more. Seymour Duncan did it before that, didn't he? But that was a different thing. It would be like a circuit built round a valve, so you just change one valve. But yes, the early Bruce Ignator idea seemed a really good idea.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that more people didn't jump on the bandwagon and copy it.
Oh, we had a patent.
Yeah.
For I think it might still be in effect. It might have just expired.
Yeah. Normally, what are they normally, 5 years, or can you decide?
It was extended longer than that, but I don't remember. I don't know for sure. Don't quote me.
No. All right. No, I think to me it sounded a great idea. It sounded very clever. I don't know how they work. Do you use a switch mode supply, or is it a high voltage?
No, there's no switch mode supply in it. It's actual linear.
So it's all proper, as you'd expect from a valve amplifier. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh. Yeah. Well, yes, that could be something to consider and to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Always cool stuff.
I like that. What I like about them as well, the Synergy ones, what I like is that their appearance is the same, because I did see it was a Randall, I think, and it had various modules, and so the cosmetics,
yes,
were a bit jarring.
Yeah. And that was discussed originally when this was being done. Do you make it, does my module be gold or is something else this? But then it looks too. In some respects it's cool, but in other respects it looks horrible. So
most of the other respects,
yes.
Yeah, that was a thing that didn't sit well with me. It was just the different appearances, and perhaps it was a good idea until it appeared in the flesh, and then. But that's the thing I like, is that you haven't done that with the Synergy. Is the Steve Vai's? Steve Vai's got a module, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's the only one that's a different color.
Green, is it?
Green.
Yeah. But no, that sounds like a good idea. So something to discuss.
Yeah.
Gonzalo, NAM 2022.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if there's. Who knows if there's a NAM 2022? Who knows if there's NAM ever again?
That would be a shame if it didn't. If there wasn't one.
Kind of, but you know.
But I wonder what will happen. See, there isn't one next year, and so I don't know what the plan is, because people. Will there be a kind of online thing? I don't know.
I don't. Yeah. Who knows? And you know, I wonder if as much as I have fun at NAM, and that's you know all fun, but I don't know if the business model of NAM really is that useful anymore.
Except to NAM.
You know, yeah, except to NAM. And the business model for NAM is very, very good and very lucrative from what I know for what we pay.
Yeah.
But to the manufacturers.
I mean, like this convention idea is, I mean, if it's a public show, I get it, but it's supposed to be a dealer show and it really isn't anymore.
No, it doesn't seem that's the case.
And you know, pretty much there aren't really new dealers, very, very few new dealers that are opened up. You know what I mean? So you pretty much know who your dealers are and who exists out there already. And a lot of them are already your dealers. So the purpose of the show is for new business, really.
Yes.
Your old dealers are going to order whether they see a video on the new product or not. You know, the old dealers don't even play it generally. They come in the booth and will just glance at it and look at it and order some. Yeah. You know, I mean, guitars are a little different. They pick guitars, you know, if they like certain guitars, but that all can be done virtually these days. You know, I don't. The amount you spend on NAM to recoup, especially on the size that we do it, to recoup that money, you can sell like half a year's worth of merchandise. Well, maybe not that much, but I mean, you have to sell a lot, you know, to actually recoup that expense.
Well, it's majorly expensive.
I mean, for a huge thing like that, yeah, it's over $100,000 for us.
Yeah, it's a nice stand. I mean, it's great for you know, people that want to come in and play, but that will be those people coming in and trying the stuff will either be people that their gigs are quite high profile, or just members of the public that want to have a go on that setup you've got. You know, I've been in the room, and
90%, I'd say 95% of the people who are playing through your rig at NAM, Dave, are just guys who just want to play through your rig.
They're just coming to hang out.
Yeah, they just want to come through and just play and check. Yeah, but if they're
going to hang out and drink my bar.
Exactly. Hey, we got a question from Philip Aspie. Suggestion for attenuating a deluxe reverb style amp to get breakup at band volumes, ideally 500-ish, or suck it up and save it for an Ox or Waza. I can give you my opinion. I've got well, it's not a Deluxe Reverb, but it's similar to that Fender style. I got a who makes it? God, no, the totally. It's an attenuator from Dr. Z.
That's actually works great for that.
Yeah, what's it called? The Z
break or something.
Yeah, I've got it literally just sitting right here next to me.
It was an original design by Ken Fisher, of train wreck circuits, and then it was kind of adapted. Dr. Z started making the design. It's a very simple attenuator, but
it's called the brake light.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah.
There's also a Tone King one. There's a small wattage Tone King one that sounds really good.
Is the Tone King one based on, you can get those things called an L pad, which is largely designed for speaker attenuation.
The Tone King is reactive. It's got a lot of circuitry in it going on. The other one is a pad, so to speak. To be honest, it's quite good. The original Trainwreck design. The only thing you really lose is maybe just a touch of top end. But that's okay. I think there's more there. So turn the treble up more.
Right. Exactly. There's plenty of high end on those amps.
Sure. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah, the Z-Break would work pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to spend $1,000 or $1,200 on an aux or something like that for that.
Not for that purpose. No, I think for live, you're literally you've got to waste some power somewhere. But that's, I think, all you need to do. I think if you're wanting to take a signal for front of house or something like that, it might be different. But if you just want to be able to crank it up without quite so much sound pressure, one thing I used to like to do, and this is very simple, I used to use a Palmer PDI-03, the rack version, and I had a 16 ohm cabinet, old high watt cabinet, and I'd plug that into one 4 ohm socket, or one socket set to 4 ohms, and then I'd take the Palmer, which was an 8 ohm load, and so I got probably about a third of the power into the cabinet.
So just a parallel load.
Yeah. I didn't. It's not. It's you've got 5.3 ohms instead of 4, but that worked well for me. And then I could take a load out to the PA, and it wasn't brilliant, but it, for the kind of gigs I was doing, it worked very nicely.
Right. Yeah, I've heard good things about the Palmer as well.
Yeah.
Helgi Runar Gunnarsson, thanks for this super chat. I don't know what that translates into dollars, but it looks impressive. Thank you.
It's a big number.
I bet it's not as impressive as you think. So thank you.
Yes, really appreciate it. Hello from Iceland. Love the show. Watch it every week. Thanks so much. Plan on getting both a BE100 Deluxe and a twin sister within the next year. Which one should I get first? I'll let Dave answer.
I don't know. That's a good question. Which one should you get first? I don't know. Do you like chocolate or vanilla? It's twin sister is more vintage. It's fatter. It's more, if you need that first, then get that. If you need more of like a high gain rock thing, then get the B Deluxe first.
Agree with that. Sola Guitarra, thank you. Hi, I prefer 1x16 ohm speakers, but if I do 2x8 ohm speakers, does the sound is better when the amp is at 16 ohms or 2x16 ohm speakers in a 8 ohm amp? Man, that's confusing.
So are we saying is a 2 8 ohms in series better than one 16 ohm speaker? Or
he might just be saying if it's better 16 ohm tap or 8 ohm tap. Well, theoretically,
neither.
Theoretically, it shouldn't be any different. Although there's some instances like vintage Marshalls, for instance, had their negative feedback taken off the speaker jack, the really old ones. And so the negative feedback changes with the impedance. So that does change change the sound theoretically. Also, in my experience, 8-ohm cabinets in general, for some reason, and I don't have scientific proof on this, but for some reason seem to have a bit more mid-range to them. And I can't, maybe that's a test or a video we'll do. I'll get Pete Thorne to do it one day. Have 2 brand new speakers in a 112 cabinet and have one be 8-ohm and one be 16-ohm, and then record it and see.
It could be, and this is only a guess, and I think that the difference could be really subtle, is that your speaker lead will have an impedance and an inductance, etc. So it will have a proper impedance to an AC signal. And the resistance it will also have, and I'm wondering whether you will lose a greater percentage of your power in the lead with a smaller impedance. So say your speaker lead is 1 ohm, I shouldn't think it would be that high, but if it's 1 ohm and you've got a 16 ohm load, then you've got 1/17 of the power disappearing in your cable. But if it's 1 ohm and a 4 ohm load, then you've got 20% disappearing. But because of its impedance, so that may actually be quite a good observation. I've never noticed that, but it isn't. It's not a test I've done, but there may actually be some. Well, there will be some scientific explanation, and it could well be. It's a little bit like some people when they wire a 4x12. Some people will use 5 bits of wire and then 2 going off to the speaker jack, and some people will use 4 bits and 2 going off to the speaker jack. Arguably, there's less inductance with less pieces of wire, and that should change the sound, but it's very subtle.
I've done that test.
You've done it, have you? And,
yeah,
and what do you think?
2 different ways of wiring a 4x12 cabinet. One would be the old vintage way that Marshall did it, which was 2 sets of speakers in series and then those pairs in parallel at the speaker jack.
Yep.
Versus the other way of wiring it. One say it's parallel series, and others say it's series parallel. But the other way of wiring, which uses, let's see, 4 bits of wire. Let's call it. I guess more than that. But and it does sound different. It changes. It does sound different. It's one. I prefer the old way.
Is that how yours are?
Top end is a little sweeter. The it's sort of like the same thing of like the notes flow out of the cabinet better.
I've never done it. It's something I'm aware of, but it's not a test I've done.
Yeah.
But I always used to, with a say 4x12, I'd wire the left hand pair in parallel, the right hand pair in parallel, and then put a wire to put those in series on the top speakers, and then go and then off to the jack.
Yeah.
That's how I often did it. But then a friend of mine suggested that because he knew a lot about vintage amps, vintage wiring, and he was telling me that the way that Marshall wired their old cabinets was so you've got the top pair in series and the bottom pair in series, and then you parallel the top with the bottom pair. I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the two series pairs are there's two twisted sets of wires that go to the jack, and then that's in parallel. So the jack is the point where they're in parallel.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yes. Okay.
And that's the way we currently wire our cabinets.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Formerly, we used to wire them a different way, and then I went down this rabbit hole one day.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's change this.
Yeah.
Not that the other way doesn't sound good, but it's just, I don't know. There's always those little things that you kind of tweak along the years.
Yeah. I think probably the person on the stage or the person right near it benefits more than anyone else.
Yes.
I don't think. I always say that the room. People say, which valves do you recommend? Would you recommend I bias my output valves at a static bias of say 39 milliamps instead of 36? And I think, well, it will make a difference, but it will be so subtle that the room you're playing in and where you've got your, where your settings are, will have a far bigger impact on that. Than something very subtle. It does change the sound, but then you can do lots to change it after that, and it really makes what you've done, in a bias adjustment or something like that, it just voids what you've done, really, I think.
Right. All right. I just wanted to thank John Split for the super chat. I don't know if you had a question. I didn't see it. But if you did, type it back in. I know there's let's see, I'm going to go through some more questions. I know there's a lot I'm probably missing. So we talked about earlier, there was a power amp. There was originally that question about you guys coming out potentially with a power amp. I forget who asked that question, but do you want to address that potentially as well?
Yeah. I mean, it's something we talked about, and we talked about, would it be a valve power amp, a standalone thing that would sit on top of a cabinet, or would it be, because I think probably the point of that would be to use the V4 pedals with the power amp. And then we talked about perhaps if people want something portable and that would fit on a pedal board, then something like the output stages that we put in the V4 Duchess, and which is one of the power modules. We get 180 watts. I think probably the maximum you can get out of one of those is 210, I think. But what I didn't want to do was start introducing a limiter circuit, because if you put too much signal into those Class D modules, they won't distort as such as they'll just turn off, and so that's a nuisance because they'll turn off not for long, a couple of seconds, but so I just thought, well, we'll just go close to 200 watts. So we went to about 180, but we thought something like that might be a better power amp, just bearing in mind what people might want to use it for, which is a portable rig.
Right.
So it's something we may do. It's something that has been discussed, but it's not on the roadmap at the moment.
Gotcha.
Watch this space is often what I say to people, because it is, it has been discussed more than once. So, but it's not on our immediate plans. It's not what I've been working on of late, but it may happen.
Okay. Servando Flores, thank you for the super chat. Martin, can you talk about your cabs, like why you decided to go with Pine and perhaps your favorite speakers? I love my V212 VG, portable and punchy.
Pine. This was something that was almost a bit of guesswork, I think, back in the Cornford days. And Paul and I discussed what should we do. And it was, I think, just because I had a couple of old cabinets, old 4x12s, Marshalls, and a new one. And I had one old angled one that had 25 watt, so the 25 watt greenbacks. I had a straight fronted one that had the 30 watt, the original, I think probably what some people refer to as a Jimi Hendrix speaker, so the 30 watt greenback sort of thing. And then I had one with G1275s and or G1275T as it was. That was probably a late 80s 4x12. And I like the sound of the older cabs, but to me it was because they probably got a bit rickety and they were just wood was moving, which in terms of the physics involved here isn't a good idea. You really want a very good like mechanical ground to get the maximum sound pressure from a speaker. You want everything else to stay still, and so the speaker pushes the air. But we like the sound of the wood moving. That's one reason. And the other thing we did with those, and again, it's probably not, or arguably is not good engineering practice, was that the baffle we used was quite thin. And again, it made the cabinet resonate. So it was a 9mm baffle, 9mm thick baffle. And so that's what we did, and we liked the sound of it. But it was really guesswork. It was how can we make a cabinet that sounds old, and it did. It definitely sounds. It's got a nice tone, but probably from a sound projection point of view, it's not very good, or it's not as good. You can still get them loud, but I think if you've got a sturdy cabinet and a thick baffle, and nothing moves other than the speaker, so that's the thing that's moving the air. That's an efficient way to do things. What we did wasn't a very efficient way to do things, but it made a nice sound on the stage.
Yeah, a little richer, a little warmer, a little more resonant.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was purely it. And it was. We didn't make loads of cabinets and try different different combinations. We liked what it did, and it did sound different, not huge. It's a lot of these things, they're subtle differences.
Oh yeah, but it all adds up.
It does, yeah. It adds up, and it's one of those things where really it's the player standing near his cabinet on the stage is going to benefit more than anyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that was my thinking. That's why we did it, and I think we'd learned that some, not Marshall cabinets, but certainly some old Fender cabinets and things were Pine, so we did that. So it wasn't a hugely scientific process. We just thought this might work, and it did, and we didn't delve too much into it after that.
Okay,
so that's how it came about.
Thank you. I think this will be the last question because I got a bolt at the 2-hour mark. So Alex B, I'm running stereo with 2 4x12 Chinese greenback V30 cabs. Want to go wet, dry, wet. Do I need the same speakers in the dry cab and wet cabs if I run some dry in the wet cabs? Can I do all Heritage greenback or Chinese greenback or all V30? It doesn't really matter.
You can put whatever you want. It just it'll be the blend of the tones. It doesn't really matter. Yeah.
I think that one thing, and I don't even know that whether this is particularly important because you've got separate power amps, but sometimes the sensitivity of different speakers needs to be considered. Some will be, you know, a greenback is quieter than a vintage 30, given the same signal. One's less efficient, but it doesn't matter. I think with having a stereo power amp and then a dry cab from your from directly from your amp, it probably doesn't matter, but it's something to think about. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. Although I do mix them in a cabinet, but I put the vintage 30s in the bottom, so they don't hit you as hard.
no, that's good. That's a good point. That's sensible. Yeah.
And there's one more quick one, Mark, too. Someone asked about Mercury output transformers or Mercury transformers in general, and an opinion on it, and versus what I use. I don't particularly care for Mercury magnetics output transformers. They're kind of dark sounding and veiled to me. I don't think they sound really much like an original transformer at all in the comparisons that I've done. The transformers I have made sound very much like an original old transformer. So it's not that the Mercury isn't a good product. This is I don't particularly care for them.
Cool. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Martin, for coming on. I really appreciate you taking 2 hours of your day or evening to really, really appreciate it. And I hope everybody checks out Victory amps. I'm not sure where they're sold, but wherever they're sold, check them out. And then our next guest is Josh Fiden. Fiden? God, why do I keep messing that up? From Voodoo Labs, November 13th. Tosin Abasi is on November 20th. We've got Lindy Fralin on December 4th. And that's it for right now. So I really appreciate everybody joining us. We got like 280 people still. We had like 300 for the whole show. So it's great. I really appreciate everybody watching. Hope you have a good weekend. Martin, just hang on for a second while we say goodbye.
Yeah, we'll do.
And Dave, I hope you have a good weekend. All right. We'll see you soon, guys.
Cheers.